I've decided to start a new life. Without you. The words sliced through the hum of celebration like a shard of glass dropped in silence. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. The clinking of silverware stopped. Laughter died mid-breath. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the man standing beside me, my husband of 28 years, Nathaniel Sinclair, still holding his champagne glass aloft, as if offering a toast. But it wasn't a toast. It was a public execution. My name is Caroline Sinclair. I'm 54 years old. And this moment, right here in the middle of an upscale Atlanta restaurant, was supposed to be about our daughter's graduation. Elena, our only child, had just walked the stage that morning, summa cum laude, her future gleaming with promise. We'd gathered with family and friends to honor her. I wore my best navy silk dress. Nathaniel was in a tailored suit. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Until he opened his mouth. The room went still awkward. Breath held still, as if waiting for the drama they assumed would follow. The gasps. The tears, the slap, the scene. Instead, I smiled. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said evenly. And then I reached into my handbag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Calmly, I placed it beside Nathaniel's dinner plate. "What's this?" he asked, blinking, that smug grin faltering just slightly. "Something for you to read later," I replied, with the kind of composure that only comes from months of preparation. I turned to Elena, who sat beside me frozen, her graduation cap still tilted awkwardly on her head, her bright eyes wide with disbelief. I cupped her cheek, kissed her gently, and whispered, "I am so proud of you, sweetheart. Today is still yours." Then I stood, smoothed my dress, looked directly at the stunned room. "Please, everyone, enjoy your meal. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon." And with that, I walked out. No screaming, no pleading, no begging him to reconsider. Just the soft click of my heels on marble and the sound of 50 people remembering how to breathe again. The heavy restaurant door swung shut behind me. Outside, the late spring Georgia heat hit me like a wall, humid and thick, but I welcomed it. After years of emotional suffocation, the heat felt like breath. Behind me, I heard the door burst open. "Caroline!" Nathaniel's voice once so deep and steady, now shrill and desperate. "What the hell is this? What have you done?" I didn't turn around, I didn't answer, I just kept walking, because that envelope he was holding, that was the beginning of his unraveling. He thought he was the one with the plan. He thought he was finally making his move. He had no idea I'd already made mine months ago. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last year preparing for this day. While he played house with his younger mistress Sienna Graves, the wide-eyed marketing assistant with the fake empathy and real ambition, I'd been quietly gathering receipts, financial statements, text messages, records of wire transfers. I had done what I always did in our marriage, the invisible, difficult work. Only this time it wasn't to protect Nathaniel, it was to protect myself. Because I had known for months that something was off. And when I found the first unusual transfer from our joint account, just a few $1,000s, nothing massive, I had a choice. I could confront him then and spark a firestorm. Or I could wait, watch, build my case brick by brick. Nathaniel wanted a clean break, but the break he got was anything but clean. By the time I reached my car, Nathaniel's voice had faded behind me, swallowed by the restaurant's heavy oak doors. I slipped behind the wheel of my Lexus, hands still steady, breath measured. Not because I wasn't shaking inside, oh, I was, but because I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet, I had come too far. As I pulled out of the valet circle, I caught one last glimpse of the restaurant in the rearview mirror, a place where laughter had once lived, where birthdays and anniversaries were celebrated. Now, it would be remembered for the day Nathaniel tried to blindside me and failed. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I stopped at a quiet overlook near Piedmont Park. The city skyline stretched in the distance, and for a few minutes, I just sat, breathing, thinking, letting the numbness pass. That envelope Nathaniel now clutched like a grenade contained everything he feared most. Truth, evidence, and consequences. It was my ace. A perfectly timed response to the affair he thought he had hidden. But the truth? I had known about Sienna Graves for over a year. It started with small things. The sudden secrecy with his phone, the abrupt business dinners that didn't add up, the new cologne he wore to late meetings, At first, I chalked it up to midlife boredom. But when our joint savings began to drain inexplicably, my instincts kicked in. I'd spent my entire career as a financial analyst. Numbers didn't lie. People did. 3 months ago, while checking our statements, I noticed a $4,300 transfer to an account I didn't recognize. When I confronted Nathaniel casually, he brushed it off, said it was a temporary investment. But I knew better. I pulled up archived statements, cross-referenced transfers, and began tracking each one. What I found wasn't just suspicious, it was calculated. For over a year, he'd been funneling money into a secondary account under a shell business money. He used to buy jewelry, pay for hotel suites, and even put a down payment on a beachfront condo, with Sienna, while telling me we needed to tighten our spending for retirement. The rage had been immediate, but it never reached the surface. I buried it beneath a mask of civility while I quietly built my case. I had the prenup. 28 years ago, when we married, I came from a family with generational wealth. My parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement not to protect me, but to protect my trust. Ironically, Nathaniel was the one who pushed for it even harder, afraid of not being taken seriously by my father. He had no idea that same document would become the chain around his neck. The prenup contained a fidelity clause. As long as we remained married, any proven infidelity would result in forfeiture of shared assets. It wasn't a detail Nathaniel remembered because he never read the fine print. But I had. I met with my attorney, Michael Renner, a month after I confirmed the affair. Michael was patient, strategic, and brutal where he needed to be. He helped me gather everything: emails, texts, financial records, voice memos. It was all legal, all admissible, and all damning. I planned to serve Nathaniel the divorce papers after Elena's graduation, quietly, privately. But when I overheard a voicemail from him to Sienna, saying, "I'll make the announcement at the dinner, she won't cause a scene in public," I changed my plan. If he wanted an audience, he'd have one. He expected shock, tears, a collapse. What he got instead was steel. I pulled into our driveway an hour later. The house, our colonial home with its blue shutters and manicured lawn, looked unchanged. But it felt like a stranger now. I walked through the front door, past the foyer table where we once left birthday cards and holiday invitations, and into the kitchen. Everything was in its place, except us. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and opened his closet. Tucked behind his row of expensive suits were 2 large suitcases, already packed, ready for his grand escape. How poetic. My phone buzzed on the dresser. Text from Elena, friends. Even Nathaniel's sister, Rachel. I ignored all but one. My daughter's message. "Mom, are you okay?" I replied. "Yes, sweetheart. This is not your burden. Enjoy your day. We'll talk tonight. I love you." She didn't know yet. About the affair, about the money, about the betrayal. I had kept it from her to protect her final semester, to protect her belief in her father. That illusion would shatter soon, but not today. Not before she'd had her moment to shine. I sat in the living room, opened my laptop, and reviewed the files one last time. The prenup, the divorce petition, the forensic bank statements. I didn't need to look anymore. Every detail was etched into my memory. 3 hours later, the front door slammed open. "Caroline!" I closed the laptop slowly and turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, flushed, holding the envelope I had handed him at the restaurant like it was a live bomb. "You served me today? At Elena's graduation?" he shouted. "Are you insane?" I leaned back against the sofa, my voice calm. "I thought it aligned perfectly with your plans. You wanted to start a new life. I'm simply helping you begin." He staggered back a step, momentarily winded. "The prenup is expired," he snapped. "We've been married too long. Any lawyer will tell you that." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Section 14, page 6. The fidelity clause remains valid for the entire duration of the marriage. Your attorney should have explained that to you. Oh wait, you didn't hire one, did you? The color drained from his face, and for the first time in decades, I felt powerful. Nathaniel stood frozen, the prenup papers shaking in his hand, the gravity of his situation slowly sinking in. I could see it in his eyes, panic. Real, raw panic. The kind that only comes when a man realizes he's lost control of the very game he thought he invented. You tricked me," he sputtered. "You've been planning this." "I've been surviving this," I replied, folding my laptop shut with a soft click. There's a difference. He collapsed onto the edge of the couch, crumpling like a man twice his age. Caroline, we built this life together. I studied him, the man I once loved, the father of my child. The man who held me through 2 miscarriages, who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen during power outages, who used to leave notes on my pillow just because. But that man had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone who could smile across a candlelit dinner while funneling our money into an account meant for someone else. You chose to end this, I said, just not in the way you imagined. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He ignored it. A second buzz, then a third. He finally picked it up and groaned. Sienna is at the condo. She says her stuff's already there. I raised an eyebrow. The condo you promised her? The one you co-signed for last month? His face twisted in confusion. How did you… She used my name for verification on the leasing application. The agent called the house line. I handled it. He blinked. What did you do? I flagged the application for credit issues. The lease was never finalized. You can't do that. Oh, but I did. You see, Nathaniel, you're not the only one who knows how to manage systems. You thought I was too focused on budgets and tax reports to notice. But the truth, I've been 3 steps ahead since the moment you started moving money. He rubbed his temples like it might somehow erase the last 12 months. I need to make some calls, he muttered. To an attorney would be a good start. I stood calm and collected, picked up the small overnight bag I had packed 2 days ago, and headed toward the front door. He watched me with a mix of disbelief and fear. I'll be staying at Rachel's tonight, I said. My sister? He asked, stunned. She wouldn't… She saw you with Sienna last Christmas. She confronted you privately. You lied to her, told her it was nothing, promised you'd end it. When she realized you didn't, she came to me. He sat back speechless. I paused at the door and looked him in the eye. You have until tomorrow evening to remove your belongings. After that, the locks will be changed. He stood suddenly. Wait, Caroline, please. What about Elena? Have you even thought about how this affects her? I froze. The nerve. Don't you dare use our daughter as a shield, I said, my voice finally rising. You weren't thinking about her when you were touring beachfront properties and draining our accounts. You weren't thinking about her when you hugged her this morning and told her how proud you were, while planning to detonate her family hours later. He looked away, ashamed, or at least pretending to be. I walked out and didn't look back. Rachel's bungalow sat in a quiet neighborhood near Emory University, surrounded by blooming azaleas and ivy-covered fencing. When she opened the door and pulled me into a hug, I finally let my body relax. I just heard from Elena, she said, pouring us glasses of wine in her kitchen. You okay? I'm better than I thought I'd be, I admitted. We moved into her sunroom, where plants lined the windowsills and books filled every corner. Rachel had never married, never settled for less than she wanted. I'd admired that about her, sometimes even envied it. What was in the envelope, she asked. Divorce papers, financial proof, and the prenup. Her eyes lit up. The prenup? The one Dad made him sign when he started that first software company? I nodded. Oh, the irony, she laughed. He wanted to protect himself from you, and now it's protecting you from him. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Elena. I'm coming over to Aunt Rachel's, she said as soon as I picked up. Dad's saying all kinds of things, telling everyone you've lost your mind. Of course he is, I sighed. He always rewrites the story to make himself the victim. 20 minutes later, she arrived, still in her graduation dress, mascara streaked from crying. The moment she stepped through the door, she collapsed into my arms. Why didn't you tell me, she asked, voice muffled against my shoulder. I didn't want to ruin your last semester. You worked so hard for this day. She pulled back. Well, Dad ruined it anyway. We moved into the living room, and for the first time, I told her everything about the money, about the affair, about the plan Nathaniel and Sienna had tried to execute behind our backs. I knew something was wrong, Elena said quietly. He was so distracted lately, always on his phone, cold, but I never imagined. None of us want to see it, Rachel said, especially not in someone we love. My phone buzzed again, a message from Michael. Emergency filing approved. The accounts are frozen, court date scheduled. I showed the message to Elena. Her eyes brightened just a little. Good, she said. He deserves it. I touched her hand. He's still your father. Maybe someday, she replied. But today, he's just a liar who broke our family. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. For the first time in years, I felt the power shifting. And I knew this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The doorbell rang just as Rachel was refilling our wine glasses. "I'll get it," she said, setting the bottle down with a weary sigh. I turned toward Elena, whose face was still flushed from crying, but more composed now. She had wiped away the mascara and pulled her graduation cap off, letting her long dark hair fall free over her shoulders. "You didn't deserve any of this," I told her softly. "No," she said, voice firmer now. "But neither did you." Rachel returned moments later with a grim expression. "It's Nathaniel," she said, then added reluctantly. "And he's not alone. I didn't need to ask who the other person was." Seconds later, they stepped into the living room. Nathaniel looked worn, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, the cool arrogance that once defined him now replaced with a growing desperation. Behind him, Sienna Graves entered, her designer heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She clutched her purse like it was a shield, her eyes scanning the room nervously, landing on Elena and me. She was younger than me by nearly 2 decades, polished, blonde, with that effortless, glossy confidence. But right now, she looked like a deer that had wandered into traffic. "Caroline," Nathaniel began, voice thin and defensive, "we need to talk about the accounts." "Do we?" I responded without standing. Sienna stepped slightly behind him, as if shielding herself from what was about to happen. "You froze everything," Nathaniel said, his voice rising. "That was extreme, vindictive even." 3 days until the preliminary hearing," I said calmly. "Then the judge will decide what's appropriate." "What am I supposed to do until then?" he demanded. "I have bills, a life." "You have your personal account," I replied. "The one you've been funneling money into for the past year. That should keep you afloat." Sienna turned toward him sharply. "Wait, what account? What does she mean? Funneling money?" The shift was immediate. Nathaniel's face went pale, his mouth opened, then shut again. "You didn't tell her," I said, almost sympathetically. "Of course not." I was going to," he stammered. Sienna crossed her arms. "How much money, Nate?" I smiled slightly. The cracks in their little fantasy world were already beginning to show. "Don't do this here," Nathaniel snapped at her, then turned back to me. "Caroline, this isn't like you. You're always the reasonable one." "Perhaps you never really knew me," I said. Just like I never really knew the man who would plan his wife's public humiliation and lie to his own daughter's face hours before breaking her heart. "Speaking of your daughter," Elena interjected, stepping forward. "You do remember this is still my graduation day, right? The one you hijacked with your melodrama?" "Elena," Nathaniel said, startled. "This doesn't involve you." "Doesn't involve me?" she repeated, eyes blazing. "You destroyed our family on my graduation day. You lied to Mom. You lied to me. And now you show up here with her and expect a civil conversation." Sienna looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said quietly, tugging on Nathaniel's sleeve. He shook her off. "No, I'm not leaving until we work this out." Rachel, who had been standing silently near the fireplace, stepped forward now. "I think your guest has had enough," she said, "and so has Elena." "I'm still your husband," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking slightly, turning to me as if for the first time realizing what he had lost. "And I'm still your daughter," Elena added sharply. "But today I barely recognize either of us." He turned to Sienna, perhaps hoping for support, but she was already stepping back toward the front door. "This is too much, Nate," she said. "Like you said this would be easy." He ignored her. Instead, he turned back to me, his tone shifting once again. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. One mistake." "No," I replied, standing now, my voice cool and unwavering. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated choice, a year-long deception, a betrayal so deep it bled through every part of our lives." Nathaniel's jaw tensed. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said quietly. "But I am reclaiming something I gave away for far too long, my self-respect." He didn't respond. Sienna turned to me, voice tentative. "I thought he was going to talk to you privately. He said today would be respectful." I gave her a long, measured look. "You may have believed that, but you walked willingly into a relationship built on deceit. Now you get to watch it collapse." Rachel opened the front door. "I think it's time you both left." Nathaniel hesitated. "Elena," she looked at him, tears now brimming in her eyes, but her voice firm. "You asked if this involves me." Here's your answer. I worked 2 jobs to help pay for textbooks, while you said money was tight. Meanwhile, you were planning beachfront property and buying jewelry for your mistress. You're not just a liar, Dad. You're a coward. Sienna looked horrified. Nathaniel looked devastated. But I felt weightless. They left without another word. Back in the living room, Elena collapsed onto the sofa beside me. I've never talked to him like that, she said through tears. And he's never needed to hear it more, I replied, pulling her into my arms. Rachel brought us wine again and raised her glass. To new beginnings. This time, I didn't just raise mine. I believed it. 3 days later, the clouds rolled in over Atlanta like a warning. Rain drizzled down the courthouse steps as I climbed them beside my attorney, Michael Renner, the same man who had helped me craft this case with precision. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit, Michael looked calm, calculated, focused. I had chosen him for that very reason. He didn't flinch, and neither did I anymore. Nathaniel was already inside when we entered the courtroom. He sat hunched beside a young, wide-eyed lawyer who looked fresh out of law school, an associate from a corporate firm with 0 experience in family law. The sight would have made me laugh if it weren't so pathetic. Nathaniel barely glanced at me when I took my seat across from him. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe, finally, he understood that the power he used to wield so carelessly was gone. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, no patience for games, and a sharp tone, called the room to order. We are here today to address the emergency filing in the case of Sinclair versus Sinclair, she began. Let's begin with the matter of the prenuptial agreement. Michael passed the thick folder of evidence forward. The judge flipped through it carefully. This document appears to be in order, she said, adjusting her glasses. Does the respondent contest its validity? Nathaniel's lawyer stood awkwardly. Your Honor, we believe the agreement is expired due to the duration of the marriage. 28 years is... Section 18, the judge interrupted, clearly states the agreement remains in effect for the entire term of the marriage and through all legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution. There is no expiration date listed. The young lawyer faltered. Yes, but... There are no buts here, counselor, she snapped. Now, let's move to the financial disclosures. Michael stood. Your Honor, we've provided documentation of systematic fund transfers from joint accounts into a private account over a 14-month period. These transfers directly violated disclosure requirements in Section 23 of the prenuptial agreement. He handed over printed statements, spreadsheets, and corresponding legal citations. The judge reviewed them with sharp eyes, nodding slowly. And this account was used for non-marital expenditures? She asked. Yes, Your Honor, Michael replied. Primarily on luxury items, travel, and arrangements related to an extramarital relationship. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. I'm ruling to maintain the freeze on all joint accounts pending full discovery, the judge said. Mr. Sinclair will retain access to his personal account for living expenses only. The family home remains under Mrs. Sinclair's possession until further determination, as stipulated in the infidelity clause. Nathaniel's face turned a deep, angry red. This is outrageous, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. The judge looked up sharply. Mr. Sinclair, if you had read the document you insisted on your wife signing 28 years ago, you would know this is precisely what you agreed to. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. We will reconvene in 30 days for the full hearing. Outside, Nathaniel caught up to me in the courthouse corridor. Caroline, wait please. I turned slowly, keeping a measured distance. You said everything you needed to say in court. I didn't think it would go like this, he said, his voice low. I didn't think you'd fight back. No, you didn't, I replied. You counted on the woman you left behind, the one who made excuses for your selfishness, who smoothed over your recklessness, who bent so far backward to make you feel like a man that she forgot who she was. His shoulders slumped. 28 years, that has to count for something. It did, I said, until the moment you decided it didn't. I walked away, heels clicking on the cold marble floor, leaving him alone in a silence of his own making. Word of the courtroom showdown traveled fast. Our social circle was filled with people who thrived on appearances. Some friends called with cautious support. Others called for gossip. I gave none. I simply said, Nathaniel and I are separating. These things happen. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's carefully crafted image-successful entrepreneur, loyal husband, family man crumbled like wet paper. The financial freeze killed his condo deal. The lease was void. The luxury SUV he'd placed a deposit on was canceled. His business suffered without my silent financial safety net. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me, half laughing. "Guess who's suddenly single again?" she said. "I'm guessing it isn't Leonardo DiCaprio." "Sienna," she said. "She moved out already." Apparently, she discovered Nathaniel's business's bleeding money and the substantial savings he promised. Non-existent. I didn't even blink. She didn't sign up to date a man with problems, just one with a wife. She told Jennifer loudly at brunch that she thought he was a high-value man. Turns out he's just a high-maintenance mess. We laughed, not cruelly, but truthfully. Nathaniel had spent years building illusions. Now all of them were crumbling, one by one. Meanwhile, I was building something new. I rented a small office space downtown. Nothing flashy, just bright windows and clean furniture. And launched the consultancy I had dreamed about for years, Sinclair Financial Transitions. My first clients were women like me, divorcing, overwhelmed, scared of the numbers they had ignored for too long. By the end of my second month, word of mouth had brought in 7 more clients. I specialized in helping women secure their futures through divorce, widowhood, and sudden life changes. For the first time, I felt useful not as a wife or a mother, but as a professional, an advocate, a force of stability. Elena visited often, even brought coffee and donuts on Saturdays. She had started her job in Charleston and was thriving. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said one day as I reviewed a new client's retirement plan. "You're doing what you were meant to do." "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me," I replied. Helping women see what's coming and prepare for it. Because sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to rise. It was raining again, soft and cold on what would have been our 29th wedding anniversary. I stood in front of the courthouse, watching my reflection blur in a puddle near the steps. For nearly 3 decades, June 12 had been marked by roses, dinner reservations, and carefully wrapped cards filled with hollow sentiments. Now it marked something far more honest: closure. Nathaniel arrived 5 minutes late, looking like a man who hadn't slept. His once confident gait was reduced to something between hesitation and defeat. His tailored suit couldn't mask the weight he carried or the toll the last 6 months had taken on him. He was alone. Sienna had disappeared weeks ago, reportedly dating a real estate developer from Savannah. She had moved out after discovering Nathaniel's business was in decline, and his fortune was nothing more than a dwindling account and a mountain of canceled plans. Even the friends who had once toasted their new beginning at rooftop bars were gone now. Most had quietly chosen sides, and they hadn't chosen his. Inside the courtroom, the final hearing was quick. The judge, the same silver-haired woman from our first session, read her ruling with quiet authority. "The court upholds the terms of the prenuptial agreement in full," she stated, tapping her pen once on the bench. "The division of assets shall proceed accordingly." Nathaniel's lawyer, a different one this time, older but clearly defeated, nodded in silence. I retained the family home, 70% of our joint investments, and the full contents of my retirement and inheritance accounts. He walked away with his personal belongings, the remainder of his failing business, and whatever funds were left in the account he had tried so hard to hide. Justice had a funny way of coming full circle. Outside, as people filtered past us, Nathaniel approached slowly, as if testing whether I would even acknowledge him. "I made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. I studied his face. The lines were deeper now. His eyes, once full of fire and pride, looked empty. "There's no going back," I said gently but firmly. "Is there any chance we could—" "No," I interrupted. "That door is closed, locked, gone." He nodded, not fighting. For the first time, I think he finally understood that I meant it. Not out of anger, but peace. "I hope you find happiness, Caroline," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve it." For the first time in years, I believed him. 6 months later, Sinclair Financial Transitions was thriving. I had moved out of the modest office I first rented and into a larger suite with exposed brick walls, warm lighting, and a view of the city skyline. I hired 2 associates, both women, who had left high-pressure finance jobs for something more meaningful. Together, we worked with clients navigating divorce, loss, or fresh starts. My calendar was full. My name was spreading. And for the first time since I had given up my career for Nathaniel's ambitions, I wasn't just back, I was better. Elena visited often, her job in Charleston giving her just enough flexibility to spend weekends with me. Sometimes she brought flowers, other times stories from work or dates that didn't go anywhere. But every time, she brought pride. "You know what's ironic?" she said one evening, curling up with a blanket on my living room couch. "If Dad had just told the truth, if he'd owned up to things instead of sneaking around, he might have walked away with half." I laughed, sipping from my tea. Sometimes people can't see past what they want in the moment. "He always wanted more," she said, "but he never knew what he already had." That stayed with me, because while Nathaniel had spent his life chasing more money, more admiration, more youth, I had learned the power of enough. Enough strength to walk away. Enough self-worth to start again. Enough courage to build something new, not just from the pieces he left behind, but from the parts of myself I had buried long ago. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside, a small note in Nathaniel's handwriting. "Caroline, I see you everywhere now, on the news, on business panels, in articles about women reinventing themselves. I don't blame you for what you did. I envy you for who you've become. I used to think I built something, but you're the one who actually did. I hope Elena forgives me one day. And I hope you never stop moving forward. N." I stared at the note for a long moment, then tucked it away, not out of sentimentality, but because it was no longer my burden. He had finally said something real, but I had already moved on. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, cooking a quiet dinner. My hands moved automatically as I reflected on the years gone by. There had been heartbreak, but also healing. There had been betrayal, but also a rebirth. I was no longer Caroline Sinclair, the betrayed wife in a pearl necklace smiling through her husband's lies. I was Caroline the founder, the mentor, the mother who raised a fierce daughter and rebuilt her life one spreadsheet, one client, one act of quiet defiance at a time. And when I sat down at my table, alone but never lonely, I smiled. Because sometimes the best love story is the one you write for yourself. It had been 3 months since the final hearing. Spring was blooming again in Atlanta, dogwoods flowering, patios filling with laughter, and life moving on, as it always does, but not for Nathaniel. I hadn't heard from him directly since the letter, and I hadn't expected to. But bits of news drifted through the grapevine. His business was barely holding together, his partnership with a high-end real estate firm had dissolved, and he had moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. Nothing tragic, just reality, stripped of illusions. Apparently, he had even tried to rekindle friendships from our old circle, the same friends who once clinked glasses at our anniversary dinners and attended backyard barbecues. But something had shifted. People who used to indulge him now avoided him. A few even reached out to me with sheepish apologies for staying silent when they knew what was happening. "It's not just about what he did," one of them, Julia, told me over coffee. "It's that he tried to pretend nothing happened. Like he could charm his way back into the life he broke. That was always Nathaniel's flaw. He thought reputation was reality." Meanwhile, Sinclair Financial Transitions had crossed a milestone, 100 active clients. We had just expanded into a second floor, hired another associate, and were now speaking at women's leadership forums and financial literacy workshops across Georgia. I was invited to a panel called Women Who Rebuilt, Turning Loss into Leadership. I nearly declined. The old me, the version of Caroline, who used to fear attention unless it was Nathaniel's, still whispered doubts sometimes. But then I thought of the women I'd helped, the letters they'd written, the relief on their faces when they realized they were finally safe. So I said yes. Elena came with me that night. She stood in the back of the auditorium, clapping louder than anyone, beaming with that mix of pride and protection only a daughter could possess. Afterward, as I stood near the refreshments table, greeting women who shared pieces of their own journeys with me, I heard a voice behind me that stopped me cold. "I almost didn't recognize you." I turned slowly. It was Harriet Langston, Nathaniel's former business partner's wife. We hadn't spoken since before the separation. She had been part of our inner circle for years, Sunday brunches, charity events, New Year's Eve parties. "Caroline," she said, a small smile on her lips. "You've changed." "Growth tends to do that," I replied. She paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I should have reached out sooner. When everything happened, well, I didn't know what to say." "You weren't the only one," I said, more gently than I expected. She nodded, then leaned in. He told everyone you'd had a breakdown, that you were unstable, vindictive. But after the court ruling, after Sienna left, the truth came out. People are starting to realize he was never the victim. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He misses Elena, she added. I glanced across the room where my daughter stood chatting with another guest, glowing with purpose. He should have thought of that before making her collateral damage. Harriet didn't argue. Later that week, as if by cosmic timing, Elena received a dinner invitation from Nathaniel. Handwritten, mailed, no texts, no voicemails. Should I go? She asked me one evening, sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. I hesitated. Only if you want to. I won't be hurt either way. I don't know what I'd say to him. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Sometimes just showing up is enough. For closure, if nothing else. So she went. And when she came home that night, she didn't say much. Just hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "Thank you for not turning me against him." You came to that on your own, I said, stroking her hair. But inside I felt the tension finally loosen. I had protected her when it mattered, and now she was strong enough to protect herself. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a local college's Women in Business conference. It was the same university Elena had graduated from less than a year ago. Standing at that podium, I looked out over rows of eager faces and realized just how far I had come. Not just geographically from courthouse steps to speaking stages, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was no longer the woman who planned dinner parties and adjusted her dreams around her husband's whims. I was a builder now, a mentor, a woman who had stood at the edge of ruin and decided to climb instead of crumble. After the speech, a young woman came up to me, maybe 23 or 24. She had tears in her eyes. "My mom went through something similar," she said. "She never recovered. But seeing you gives me hope that maybe she still can." That moment meant more than any courtroom win, because in reclaiming my own voice, I had become someone else's permission to rise. Back at home that night, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the golden lights of the city blink on one by one. I thought of the past, of love lost, of illusions shattered, of a man who once believed he could control the ending. But this story was mine now, and I was nowhere near finished writing it. 6 months had passed since the final court date. I no longer marked time by hearings or letters from attorneys, but by milestones I never expected to reach. The expansion of Sinclair Financial Transitions was one of them. We had just signed the lease on a 3rd floor and hired our 4th associate, a brilliant single mother who had once been a client. Full circle didn't begin to describe the feeling. Elena had moved into her own apartment in Charleston. Her calls were less frequent now, but never absent. She sent texts before big presentations, photos from girls' nights out, and called whenever she needed advice, not just from her mother, but from someone she now saw as her role model. One Saturday morning, as sunlight poured through the window of my office, I looked around at the place I had built from the ashes of betrayal. Soft, warm tones filled the space. Clients' thank you cards lined the bulletin board. Fresh flowers from Rachel stood on my desk, and on my calendar, circled in red, was a simple note, CFT 1-year anniversary, a year. 1 full year since the day I walked out of that restaurant with 50 eyes watching and the weight of my marriage collapsing behind me. I stood by the window, sipping my coffee, reflecting. I hadn't just left Nathaniel. I had left the version of myself who allowed her voice to be dimmed. I had stopped being the peacemaker, the caretaker, the one who stayed small so someone else could feel big. That Caroline, the one who believed loyalty required silence, was gone. In her place was someone sharper, freer, fiercely whole. Later that day, Rachel hosted a quiet celebration at her house. Just close friends, a few clients turned all eyes, and of course, Elena, who surprised me by flying in early. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" she said, throwing her arms around me at the door. "You've got a career to build," I teased. "I'm building it on the foundation you gave me," she replied, eyes glassy with emotion. The evening was filled with laughter, soft music, and stories from women who had found their footing again. They spoke not of their divorces, but of what came after, the businesses they launched, the bank accounts they finally understood, the boundaries they learned to hold. Somewhere around sunset, as we gathered in the garden with our glasses raised, Rachel tapped her fork against a glass. "A toast," she said. To Caroline, not just for what she built, but for what she refused to let destroy her. Everyone clinked their glasses. Elena leaned in. To the woman who taught me that revenge isn't fire, it's reinvention. I smiled, because they were both right. Later that week, I was organizing some old files at home when I stumbled upon the cream-colored envelope. The same one I had handed Nathaniel at the restaurant all those months ago. I hadn't looked at it since. But now, with a strange sense of closure, I opened it again. Inside were copies of the prenup, the financial statements, and my handwritten note to him. Nathaniel, by the time you read this, your plan will already be unraveling. You thought I would break quietly, that I would vanish in shame. But I've spent 28 years watching you, learning your patterns. I knew the only way out was through you, and the only way through was on my terms. So here we are. I loved you. I supported you. I sacrificed more than you'll ever know. And now I will do something I should have done long ago. Love myself better, Caroline. I folded it back up slowly, not with anger or regret, but with finality. That letter had been my escape plan, but it had also been a key to a door I never knew existed. A door that opened not to freedom from Nathaniel, but to freedom to become. A few days later, I received another letter. This one was from a woman named Grace, a recent client who had just finalized her divorce after 20 years of emotional neglect. It read, I heard you speak at the college. I thought I was too old, too tired, and too broken to begin again. But you proved me wrong. You didn't just guide me through numbers, you helped me reclaim my story. Thank you for showing me what survival looks like when it's turned into power. Thank you for showing me what a woman can become. With gratitude, Grace, I held the letter against my chest, tears springing to my eyes. Because somewhere between the courtroom and the conference room, between the broken heart and the rebuilt business, I had become something I never intended, an advocate, an anchor, an example, not just for my daughter, but for every woman who had ever been told to shrink, to smile, to stay quiet. Now, when people ask me if I would change anything, I say no, not because the pain didn't matter, but because it led me here, to this moment, to this life, and to a version of myself I never would have met if I hadn't been forced to walk through fire. And as I sit at my desk, watching a new client walk through the door, shoulders heavy, eyes uncertain, I rise to greet her with the warmth and strength I once needed. Because now, I am no longer the woman holding the broken pieces. I am the woman who knows exactly how to rebuild them. Sometimes the end is the beginning, a life lesson from Caroline's story. There are moments in life when everything you thought was secure falls apart. A betrayal, a broken vow, a future you planned shattered. But what if that breaking point is actually the start of something greater? Caroline gave 28 years of her life to a marriage that ended in public humiliation. Her husband didn't just leave, he tried to steal her dignity, her peace, and her future. But instead of falling apart, she rose. She planned. She fought back, not with hate, but with grace, strategy, and strength. And in the process, she discovered who she truly was, a woman of power, resilience, and purpose. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of rebirth, of finding your voice when others try to silence it, of building something new from the ruins of heartbreak. To every woman watching this, you are never too old, too broken, or too late to begin again. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. Tell us what part resonated with you most. And if you believe more people need to hear stories of empowerment and transformation, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real, emotional journeys that inspire strength. Subscribe now and join our community of healing and hope. Because sometimes, the best love story is the one you write for yourself.